Fighter aircraft are some of the most advanced machines ever built and are designed to travel at incredible speeds with high maneuverability. And once you add in the complexities of operating in war zones and landing in less than ideal circumstances, the chance of an accident substantially increases. Luckily, there's a safety measure that gives pilots a chance to escape during a catastrophic event. So, join me for today's video. We're going to take a look at 15 incredible pilot ejections. Number 15. Su-30. Air shows around the world allow spectators the opportunity to see planes performing maneuvers that rarely take place anywhere else. But the drive to put on a spectacular display sometimes leads pilots to push the aircraft beyond their limits. This footage, which was recorded at the Paris Air Show in June of 1999, shows just how wrong things can go, while a Russian pilot was demonstrating the new Su-30. The jet was heralded as Russia's new game-changing platform, and part of the reason why one was sent to the display was to show the world how impressive it was. Painted in blue and white, it performed a controlled descent towards the tarmac but appeared to lose power as it tried to lift out of the dive. It appeared to skid along the ground before momentarily going back into the air, at which point the two crew members could be seen ejecting. Moments after, the jet falls back to Earth and meets a fiery end, while the pilots gently descend beneath their parachutes and land safely away from the inferno. Luckily, they both survived with only minor scrapes and bruises, and even though the incident raised questions about this new design of aircraft, it went on to become the backbone of the Russian Air Force. Number 14. U.S. Air National Guard F-16 Fighting Falcon. In May of 2019, a U.S. Air National Guard F-16 Fighting Falcon from Sioux Falls in South Dakota was approaching the runway at the March Reserve Air Force Base in Riverside County, California, when something went terribly wrong. Camera footage caught the moment that it seemed to be uncontrollably falling towards the ground, and the pilot can clearly be seen ejecting before it crashes. At first, even without someone at the controls, the jet appeared to level itself out, but this was only momentary. And it finally smashed into a warehouse district, where it punched a hole through the ceiling of one of the buildings on its way down. The pilot was fortunately recovered safely and was taken to hospital with only minor wounds, while 5 people on the ground also had to be treated for injuries, with 2 of them being taken to the hospital as well. Crashing in a populated area like this obviously poses huge risks to people, and the crews that were sent to respond to the incident were also in harm's way, because of the toxic liquids that are used in aircraft like these to feed the power units and hydraulic systems. This then led to the need for 12 first responders to undergo decontamination procedures, and it was extremely fortunate that no one suffered any long-lasting injuries. Number 13. Lunar Landing Research Vehicle. The mission to land humans on the moon was one of the most radical projects ever undertaken and involved designing brand new vehicles for the endeavor, such as the Saturn V rockets and the Apollo lunar module. The problem was that the astronauts weren't able to practice flying the lunar module while on Earth, so to give them a chance to prepare for what they might experience, NASA built the Lunar Landing Research Vehicle. Intended to fly and react in a similar way to how the lunar module would in the low-gravity environment on the moon, 2 of these research vessels were built, and later a further 3 training vehicles were constructed as well. Powered by a single jet engine on a gimbal, they were complicated to fly, but Neil Armstrong said that if he hadn't had the chance to practice in these vehicles, there's no way he would have been able to successfully land on the moon. Despite being remembered as a leading figure in the space race, Armstrong himself didn't always do things perfectly. And this footage from just over a year before he led the Apollo 11 flight show even he had issues with the research vehicle. While at an altitude of around 200 feet or 60 meters, he was forced to use the ejection seat after suffering control problems. And it was later revealed that this had happened because it had run out of fuel after burning more to overcome unexpected winds. Following this incident, neither of the LLRVs were flown again, and astronauts instead practiced in the newly built LLTVs. Number 12. Thunderbird Crash. The Thunderbirds, they are the Air Demonstration Squadron of the United States Air Force. It's first created in 1953, they're part of the 57th Wing that's based in Nevada and toured the United States as well as many other countries around the world to perform spectacular aerial displays. They've used various types of aircraft over the years, but since 1983 have flown F-16 Fighting Falcons. Slight modifications are made, such as replacing the weapons systems with smoke machines and applying the Thunderbird paint scheme, and because of the team's meticulous planning, they're regarded as one of the best display groups on the planet, having performed at more than 4,000 events. This doesn't mean accidents don't happen, though, and in 2003, at an air show at Mountain Home Air Force Base in Idaho, a pilot was forced to eject. He had just taken off and attempted to perform a split S maneuver. Unfortunately, because of the altitude of the runway, he made a miscalculation of how high he needed to go and only reached an elevation of 1,600 feet instead of 2,500 feet. Realizing his mistake, the pilot was able to fly as far as he could away from the spectators and eject less than a second before the aircraft crashed. Needless to say, the $20 million jet was completely destroyed, and in response to what happened, the Thunderbirds changed the procedures around the split S maneuver to ensure this won't ever happen again. Number 11. JAS-39 Belly Landing. This footage, which emerged in June of 2015, shows what happened when a Hungarian Air Force pilot made his approach for landing in a JAS-39C single-seater jet. He had been flying a training sortie when he experienced a nose gear failure, so was understandably tentative as he tried to touch down at the airbase. At first trying to recycle the undercarriage, but then choosing to attempt a belly landing, it soon becomes clear that he had completely lost control of the aircraft and was forced to eject. As he launched into the air, the remains of his jet skid along the runway and ground to a halt. The incident wasn't over for the pilot. For some reason, there was another malfunction that prevented the ejector seat from separating from his, and the added weight meant that he fell back down to the ground far faster than is ideal. This caused several serious injuries to the pilot, but luckily he was able to go on to make a full recovery. Possibly the most surprising part of this is that the aircraft didn't actually get damaged too badly, and rather than being scrapped, it was fully repaired and returned to active service within the year. Number 10. MiG-29 Crash. The MiG-29 was once the most feared aircraft in the Soviet Air Force and was often sent to air shows around the world so everyone could see up close just how effective they are. This footage was recorded at the 1989 Paris Air Show, where it was being flown by Anatoly Kovcher, who had been instructed to really put the jet through its paces. While performing a high-alpha, low-speed pass at an altitude of around 525 feet, the starboard engine surged and released a sheet of flame. The pilot immediately activated the full afterburner on the functioning engine, but traveling at just 111 miles per hour, there simply wasn't enough speed to keep airborne. The aircraft yawed and entered into a vertical dive, and after ensuring it wouldn't go near any spectators, the pilot ejected. In incredible scenes, the aircraft crunched into the ground nose first and erupted in a huge ball of flame, with the pilot eventually landing just 98 feet from the wreckage. Amazingly, the emergency response team was on site within just 55 seconds to deal with those flames, and the pilot didn't suffer any significant injuries. Number 9. CF-18. Captain Brian Buse was performing in a CF-18 Hornet at the Alberta International Air Show in Canada in July of 2010, when a series of events led to spectators seeing a truly one-of-a-kind display. He didn't realize it, but the engine had been malfunctioning throughout the flight, and combined with strong winds at the time, he began to struggle to keep it under control. According to Buse, the nose kept pulling down, and he soon came to the conclusion that there was nothing else he could do, and that he'd have to pull the ejector handle. In the following 4 seconds, the jet's canopy blew off and a rocket motor propelled him clear of the jet, which crashed soon after, and the strong winds pulled his parachute further away from the wreckage. While the ejection certainly saved his life, there are always consequences of exerting yourself to such forces, and Buse suffered from a number of injuries. Damage to his back meant that it would be 6 months before he was able to get into the pilot's seat once more, and he was never able to resume his duties in the Canadian Air Force, deciding instead to be a flight instructor. Number 8. PAF F7 Crash. The Chengdu J-7 is a Chinese-built aircraft that shares a lot of similarities with the Russian-designed MiG-21. Designed for a quick response and short-range combat, a number of iterations have been made, and outside China, the biggest customer for the design is the Pakistan Air Force that uses the export variant called the F7. Due to the cost of this, a large number of publicity videos are recorded of the jets in operation, and that's why this next incident happened to be captured on video. 2 J-7s have just taken off from the Minhas Air Base, but one suffers from an engine flameout soon after. Realizing they were suffering a huge engine power loss, the pilot was instructed by the control tower to eject, and the second aircraft took evasive action. But then something unexpected happened. The first jet seems to recover power and stabilizes itself, but because it no longer had a pilot, it was an inevitability that it would crash. It's one of very few incidents the Pakistan Air Force has had with this model of aircraft, and despite them all being grounded following it for inspections, they were soon back in the air once more. Number 7. F-35 Crash. Aircraft carriers, because of their short landing strips and constant movement in the water, are notoriously difficult to take off from or land on compared with traditional runways. But an incident in 2021 was particularly embarrassing for the British Navy. On board the Queen Elizabeth, which was the first in a brand new class of carrier being built by the UK, a British F-35B fighter jet can be seen taking off as the ship sails through the Mediterranean. Instead, lifting off into the sky, though, the aircraft simply falls off the end into the sea, and the pilot can be seen ejecting at the last moment. Thought to have happened because someone had left a protective cover on the jet, the pilot's parachute actually got caught on the carrier's bow, leaving him in need of rescue from a perilous position. It was fortunate that he survived, but the incident led to fears of an international incident. With classified technology on board that had been shared by the US, the race was then on to find and either recover or destroy the remains of the F-35 before it fell into enemy hands, a process that took several weeks to complete because of the depth of water in that region. Number 6. BAE Hawk Bird Strike. Flying in a war zone is, of course, the most dangerous moment as a pilot, but there's also a much higher level of risk when you're first learning how to handle the controls of an aircraft you've never been in. This footage was recorded in May of 2004 and shows an aircraft that was on a training mission with the UK and Canadian Royal Air Forces in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan, and how lucky the crew on board were that day. Flying a BAE Systems CT-155 Hawk trainer, the mission, which was a navigation trip and part of a conversion syllabus designed to familiarize an RAF student with the NFTC Hawk variant, had only just begun, and the instructor was in control at the time. The crew spotted a bird just to the left of the nose, and the next thing they knew, it had been sucked in by the engine and caused a failure. Within 45 seconds of the strike, both crew members had ejected and fallen to safety, with the stricken jet crashing into a nearby field. It's another example of how crucial an invention the ejector seat has proven to be, because with so many potential hazards that pilots of small aircraft like these may face, there's a good likelihood that if the decision is made early enough, a pilot will survive. Number 5. Belgian F-16 Incident. Ejector seats have saved countless lives over the years, but just because a pilot's able to escape a crash doesn't always mean the danger is over. It's never entirely certain where they'll eventually land, and an incident that took place in northwestern France in 2019 showed how easy it is for things to go wrong. No footage exists of the issues with the jet or the ejection, but countless images began circulating online soon after because where the two pilots had ended up. They had been forced to eject during a training flight from Belgium, in which their plane had skimmed the rooftop of a nearby house and crashed into a field. They escaped before this happened, but as they were in a residential area, the parachute of one of the pilots became entangled in a high-voltage electricity line. It took 2 hours to rescue him, during which time the 250,000-volt current had to be shut off to make it safe for response teams to climb up and retrieve him. The cause of the accident isn't known for certain, but it's thought to have been due to an engine failure that saw the pilot trying to restart it mid-air with no success. Number 4. A-6 Intruder. In 1987, 2 new pilots were towards the end of their flight training and had one more mission to perform. They were to take off from the USS Lexington, which was operating as a training carrier, and needed to prove they could then fly in an A-6 Intruder and land on the deck. In the calm waters of the Gulf of Mexico, everything seemed to be going to plan, and they made their approach. With the landing gear down and the flaps and spoiler in position, they lowered towards the deck, knowing that they needed to rely on being caught by the trap that would bring them to a stop. The technology didn't behave as expected, though, and the hook of their tailhook snapped off as it made contact with the trap. Normally, pilots increase the throttle during landing just in case something goes wrong, and this caused something unexpected to happen. The pilots, realizing there was an issue, both ejected, but the aircraft then sped up and lifted back into the air. It was a tense moment, but it would eventually crash into the water just 300 feet ahead of the carrier, less than the length of a football field, and definitely far too close for comfort. Number 3. Harrier Jump Jet. Harrier jump jets are spectacular to see thanks to their unique design that allows them to vertically lift off and even hover in the air. They are therefore a popular sight at air shows, and there was a huge crowd of spectators at the Lowestoft show in the UK in 2002 who were excited to see one up close. The event, though, will be remembered for all the wrong reasons, because instead of seeing how incredible the aircraft are, the witnesses were about to see its weaknesses. After putting on a brilliant display, the jet was nearing the end of its performance and began to hover over the North Sea off the coast. Suddenly, the sound of the engines went silent and the jet went into freefall. The pilot, Flight Lieutenant Tony Khan, was able to eject just a fraction of a second before impact, and he himself landed on top of the fuselage that had crashed beneath him. It's lucky that it had fallen into the water and not burst into flames, but things happened in such a rush that it was still a bumpy landing for him. He suffered a broken ankle and was quickly rescued and treated. The aircraft was recovered a few weeks later. The investigation found that the crash happened because of pilot error when he had operated the controls for the throttle and the nozzle direction lever at the same time, which caused the aircraft to plummet. Number 2. F-18 carrier landing. One of the reasons why landing on an aircraft carrier is so dangerous is that with such a short landing strip, it's not solely the responsibility of the pilot to stop. They rely on cables across the deck catching onto hooks on the plane to slow it down, and there's always a chance that this will go wrong. It's a system normally known as an arresting gear and transfers the aircraft's kinetic energy to dampeners below the deck. And despite being designed to handle far greater forces than they'd be expected to encounter in normal operation, wear and tear can weaken the cables. This footage was recorded of an F-18 landing on the deck, but the cable almost immediately snapped. It travels at high speed across the carrier, meaning the deck crew had to act fast to avoid it, and the pilot of the aircraft had no choice but to eject before falling into the ocean. Including the pilot, who had to be rescued from the water, a total of 7 people were injured in the event, mostly because of the flailing cable that whipped around on the deck. It's occasions like these that show it's not just a dangerous moment for the pilot of an aircraft coming in to land on a carrier, but anyone else who works on the deck as well. Number 1. Rocket Sled Ejection Test. Ejector seats are a hugely important safety device in modern fighter aircraft, but they simply don't install them and hope for the best. A huge amount of design and test work is conducted before they're approved for use, as they have to make sure that not only does the system work, but it's safe for people to use while under high G-forces. In fact, there are very few places in the world where testing like this can actually take place. One of them is the U.S. Air Force Holloman High-Speed Test Track. At 10 miles long, the track allows for rocket-powered sleds to be propelled along it to recreate flight speeds, and every moment is monitored and recorded to understand the effects. It's here that the human land speed record was set when in 1954 Dr. John Paul Stapp traveled at 632 miles an hour and reached that in just 5 seconds. He experienced a force of 46 Gs, which was so intense that almost all of the capillaries in his eyes burst, and his vision would be affected for the rest of his life. Stapp was, however, the last human allowed to ride the sled on the test track, and all experiments are now conducted with highly advanced test dummies that respond to how the human body would. This provides more reliable data too, because they no longer have to account for the difference between each individual's physiology. But even though they're not real people, the footage of the ejector seat tests is still amazing. I'll see you next time.
Watch our binge-watching playlist if you'd like to watch all of our most popular top 15 videos. Grab a drink, grab a snack, and get ready to binge.